biodiversity finance is mobilizing resources. We all know that. But when you actually analyze all the finance flows in a country, as BIOFIN does, you find out that you mobilize maybe a lot of money. A lot of that money is not actually going to biodiversity. For example, there are entrance fees and of protected areas, or any other fees or revenues from protected areas, conservation areas. They often end up in treasury. And if we, with our BIOFIN studies, try to find where it comes out again, actually it doesn't. So this is a challenge that almost every country faces in one way or the other. Sometimes we call it retention of revenues. Sometimes we call it earmarking or ring fencing of budgets. It's one of the fundamental challenges of biodiversity finance. So this is actually a disadvantage, that it's so challenging in many ways to keep money allocated ring fence for biodiversity. But there are also studies that have shown that when you do earmark, it's not always spent as efficiently. And our very good colleagues from the IMF usually also advise governments to limit this retention to the absolute minimum necessity. So this is sort of the two sides of the pendulum that we're going to talk about in this debate. And the way that we are going to structure this debate is we have a debate master who I'm going to call on in one moment. And we have 6 debaters. We're going to have 3 debaters going to argue in favor of retention. But on the other side, we're going to have another 3 debaters. They're going to argue against retention of biodiversity revenues. So this will surely lead to some very interesting discussions. All right, let me stop here, because the excitement is in the debate in this session. And I'm going to call on Assistant Secretary Mercy Sambila from the National Economic and Development Authority of the Philippines Planning and Policy Agency. She has done a lot of work on mainstreaming strategies and action plans, like the Philippines National Biodiversity Action Plan, which has been very well integrated into the national development plan of the country. She also has a bachelor's degree in mathematics and a master's degree in economics. So she's on good terrain for every area that we can discuss. And she has, in addition, a doctoral degree in agricultural economics. So in other words, she's the perfect candidate to guide our debaters. So please come forward and lead our debate. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Ono. Good afternoon to everyone. Before we start, can I ask people to come forward, please? Because you will be helping me decide the winner of this debate. Can I ask people to come forward? So that you could also listen, you know, the arguments and the rebuttals. Please. Thank you very much. So before we start, I would like to invite now and to introduce to you our debaters. As Ono has already mentioned, there are going to be 3 of them on the affirmative side and 3 on the negative side. So on the affirmative side, we have Ms. Wadzi Mandiveni, South Africa. She is the Chief Director responsible for biodiversity monitoring and specialist services in the Department of Environmental Affairs, South Africa. She's responsible for biodiversity-related multilateral environmental agreements, biodiversity sector monitoring and reporting, as well as the science policy interface of this. Her current focus is on resource mobilization for biodiversity coordination of the delivery unit of the biodiversity economy strategy and developing appropriate policy framework for natural capital accounting. Welcome, Ms. Wadzi. Please take your seat. We have another member of the affirmative group, Ms. Hannah Martinez, is the National Coordinator for BIOFIN in Belize, concurrent with her functions at the Ministry of Environment. She is in charge of promoting awareness, stewardship, and improve sectoral coordination and planning to advance biodiversity management. She holds an MS, Master's in Biodiversity and Forest Management and Conservation from Tropical Agronomic Research and Education Center based in Costa Rica. Okay, welcome. And then the third member of the affirmative camp is Dr. Nawarat Krairapanon. He is the Director of Environmental Fund Office, Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment of Thailand. Dr. Nawarat has been working on environmental policy and planning for more than 25 years. He has been Director of an Environment Fund, the biggest in Thailand. He got his PhD in marine science. Okay, so these are the three members from the affirmative. Can we give them a big round of applause, please, before I introduce to you the members from the negative camp? Negative camp, negative debaters. Okay. First in my list is Mr. Bruno Muimba, is the BIOFIN team leader for Zambia. Prior to BIOFIN, Mr. Muimba worked as Director of Finance and Administration for the Indaba Agricultural Policy Research Institute, which is a premier agricultural policy research think tank in Zambia. Before that, he also worked as financial controller for Swedish International Development Agency, or SIDA, and Swedish Embassy, Lusaka, Zambia. Mr. Bruno is a certified expert in climate and renewable energy finance. He is certified chartered accountant, Zika and ACA, infrastructure project finance expert, Middlesex University, UK, Masters of Philosophy in Development Finance, Nelson Mandela University, Port Elizabeth, South Africa, and a holder of an MBA in Financial Services, University of East London, United Kingdom. Welcome, sir. Of course, the second member of the team is Don Guillermo Zuniga. He is the BIOFIN lead technical expert for Costa Rica and the former Secretary of the Minister of Finance of Costa Rica. Welcome, sir. And of course, last but not the least in the camp negative is Mr. Vasaya Vasya. He is an analyst at the Development Financing Department of the Ministry of Finance of Mongolia. Over the last 6 years, Mr. Vasya took on various roles in the Fiscal Policy Department, Financial Policy Department, and Development Financing Department, and honed his skills on public finance, fiscal policy and financial sector development strategy, and pioneering debt management law of Mongolia. He is also in charge of consolidating the general government budget, designing the medium-term fiscal framework in line with medium-term debt management strategy, and compiling the public sector debt statistics. He has an undergraduate degree in accounting and a master's degree in finance from the National University of Mongolia. There you go, my ladies and gentlemen. Our strong and, very, very, skilled in their own fields. It's going to be a very interesting session that we're going to have, okay? Now, I would like to present now to you the rules of the debate, so please listen carefully. The affirmative will present their case, each one speaking for 5 minutes. We will be very strict with time because we only have 1.5 hours, and I would like also the audience later on to provide some insights on what happened after the debate. The negative will rebut whatever your affirmative counterparts would have said. We'll give you 5 minutes each. And the partners, Mr. Wadsi, to be rebutting whatever, Mr. Bruno rebutting Mr. Wadsi, Mr. Guillermo rebutting Ms. Hannah, and Mr. Vasya rebutting Mr. Nawarat. Sorry, okay. Okay? And then after the rebuttal, you will also provide your piece of why you would, how you think earmarking or retention of incomes for biodiversity financing is really, not a very good way of doing it, okay? So you will also be given 5 minutes each, and the same way, the same partners, the affirmative side will also, say something, comment, or, rebut on whatever you will be saying. So this will go for like 60 minutes, so 1 hour. Okay, and I will get back to the audience after that, hear from you, and then after that, after hearing probably a few comments from the audience or few reactions from the audience, I will then request you to help me decide who will be the winner. Clear? Okay, let's start the debate. We have a timer here. You have a flashcard, right? For one minute, and then time's up. Okay? Thank you. Let me just take my seat. And then I can...
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your kind attention. My name is Wadzi, as introduced, and I am the team captain for the affirmative debate. We missed the 2010 biodiversity target. We missed, and we are likely to miss, the 2020 biodiversity target, and the 2050 biodiversity target, we can only imagine what will happen. We've all agreed that biodiversity is a public good. We've all agreed that nature is at its limits. What we can't agree is how do we pay for this public good. Governments are at their natural limits as well. They're under a lot of strain to provide a number of public goods. How do we make a case for biodiversity? It can't talk for itself. It requires dedicated, earmarked, ring-fenced resources to pay for biodiversity. We have agreed, and we all know, that governments all over the world are committing to global goals for biodiversity. What we're not doing is committing the resources necessary for biodiversity to be addressed. Earmarking protects high-priority programs, and it shifts from inefficiencies. Earmarking provides a set amount that is required to make sure that nature produces what nature has been producing for free. Nature doesn't earmark what it gives us. Why should we earmark what we give nature? Nature actually has been provided for and gets resources from many production sectors. If we earmark resources from the very sources for those resources, they will be able to understand how they are positively impacting on our resources. So we believe that if we earmark resources from mining, from agriculture, towards a particular environmental good, we will have sufficient resources to cover. Tax revenue makes a direct link between an activity and expenditure. So we believe that if we earmark, we will have sufficient resources for biodiversity. Given the current constraints, Earmark is the best way to increase and in some cases even establish baselines for which biodiversity can be resourced. The aggregate stabilization, which we would get from applying and earmarking for environmental priorities, allows nature to take its rightful place and be provided for in the way that we provide for human health, in the way that we provide for agriculture. We believe that by earmarking and showing the cost it takes to look after our biodiversity, we will get more responsible management of biodiversity. The way we have seen it and the way we would like to take this discussion forward is based on the fact that if we are able to demonstrate the value from environmental taxes, if we're able to look at that amount and put a value on it, we will be able to show that from your water tariff, this much is what biodiversity is contributing. So, from linking our environmental taxes and revenues, we'll be able to actually reduce the pressure on the fiscus and demonstrate how nature is actually paying for itself. And in conclusion, I would like to again indicate that if we are able to demonstrate that if we collect at source and get our revenue aggregated at source and earmarked specifically for conservation, there will be enough resources for other sectors and nature will stand for itself. Thank you.
Thank you. So as was previously stated by my colleague, my UFC side of the court partner, earmarking has been supported because what it does is it actually allows us to prioritize what is important to our countries. From the establishment of the Rio Conventions, we all recognize the importance of biodiversity and proper environmental management. Notwithstanding, we need to also understand that though we've been signing on to many of the conventions and government have stated openly their commitments to the environment, this has not been reflected in budgetary allocations. As it is, earmarked funds constitute one of the smaller portions within national budgets. I can use Belize as an example where I'm from. Of the total $24 million collected in 2015 from biodiversity-related taxes, it was only 1.4 million that was redirected or injected into the sector. The sector in itself supports 55% of the GDP within Belize, a GDP of $1.8 million, where only 1.4 million has been earmarked for biodiversity conservation through the Protected Areas Conservation Trust. This is telling us that we are not money hungry, a money grabbing sector, but at the end of the day, the argument is clear that we are contributing to the economy, we are contributing to the livelihoods and to the well-being as it relates to clean air, fresh water, and quality potable water, but at the same time, governments are not re-injecting those funds into the environment. So as it stands, what we would like to say is we are not asking for much more than we are already receiving, but there needs to be commitment on the part of government. And how can you commit? How do you prevent corruption? How do you ensure that your biodiversity or environmental targets are met? It's by earmarking, at minimum, the funds that are required to meet the optimum level of operation or of management activities that are required to keep your biodiversity or your natural capital. Belize, for an example, has a natural resource-based economy. Our tourism is dependent on biodiversity and the environment. Agriculture, fisheries, and forestry contribute 50% to the GDP. In itself, it is a case. It's not even an argument. It shouldn't be debated. 1.4 earmarked is insufficient and shouldn't be fought against. It's the least that we could do for the environment, considering that without the environment, we are nothing.
Good afternoon. As you have heard from my colleagues about the importance of earmarkings to tap some of the money for the management of the biodiversity, not only for the country, but for the world. I will also give you an example in Thailand, in the case that how we manage the environmental fund, which is the biggest fund dealing with environment for Thailand. 25 years ago, we are actually the biggest fund of all in Thailand. The starting or the initial money for the fund is about more than actually 150 million US dollar. We support for the project to conserve, protect the natural resources, and also solving the problem for pollution, especially the solid waste and also the wastewater issue. Those activities and the spend of funding can benefit more than 7 million people, Thai people. But now, 25 years later, we're fighting to the Ministry of Finance and also the budget of Bureau to earmark some of the money from taxation to provide or to tap part of the tax getting to the environment fund so we can still have momentum to manage the biodiversity or natural resources of the country. But it is no avail because the Ministry of Finance, normally they mention that our proposal is against the law. We have the law so-called the Revolving Fund Administration Act. This fund mentioned that they don't allow any other ministry to issue or to develop their law and has a purpose to tap the money from taxation back to the environment fund. So the budget of the Bureau also cannot give us the certainty to provide annual budget every year that we can count on. It also depends on the situation of the country. This year you can have maybe 100 million. Next year you can have 500. Or another year you cannot have any budget to run the environment fund activities. So we are fighting with the Ministry of Finance and the Bureau of the Budget. But they don't really understand the importance of the conservation, the protection of biodiversity or biological resources, and as well as the environment in general. So it is important that nowadays we have only 34% left of the budget from our environment fund. So in a few years, if we still supported project to taking care of our biodiversity or environment, we will have nothing to do in a few years. We have no budget. Even we have some of the interest from the loan that we provide to some of the private sector, but that's a small amount of money. It cannot be accountable for future activity. And when we again discuss with the Ministry of Finance, they cannot find any solution or another financial solution that can or could provide some of the money to our environment funds. So the future of environment fund is nowhere to go. So it must be earmarked to some extent to tap some of the money from taxation coming back to the environment fund, especially for maybe the pollution tax from industrial emission, those of the wastewater. So we can at least have opportunity to get some funding back to the environment fund. So again, it must be earmarked some of the money in other possibility that we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I think those were 3 very convincing cases and it making our other panel members' lives very difficult. So it seems like actually biodiversity is a money maker already. And we don't need to mobilize resources, we need to just keep them. But let's check if that's really true. Let's go over now to, I don't want to say the dark side, but those in favor, those against retention. And I'm sure we'll hear an excellent case from our expert from Zambia, Bruno.
All right, I'll choose to speak from here. You see, one obvious thing that our colleague, especially by direct rebuttal, I need to take you to the cleaners on that one. You need to realize that almost all the sectors now, each one thinks their sector is extremely very important. Here we are talking about biodiversity, but I can tell you someone from agriculture, mining, health, there are all manner of declarations that are coming up. You probably might be aware that in agriculture now we have the Malabo Declaration under the CADIB, where the governments must spend a minimum of about 10% on agriculture. So there are all these declarations. And they'll convince you that their sector is just as important as biodiversity. So once you realize that fact, then it actually kills the case for you to begin to advocate for earmarking of funds, specifically for your sector, because I think, truth be told, every sector is important. So on that front, I think it kind of weakens the case, because we also understand that I think there's this appetite to generate domestic revenues, because like ODA for developing countries has actually gone down. So the central government requires all the money in the kitty. I think the solution then that we should be talking about is much more about revising non-fiscal revenues like fees and fines. And another aspect is that once we have all these monies in the kitty, how do we improve the budgetary allocations and things like that, not advocating for earmarking. The only aspect where perhaps we can meet midway is to say, I would agree for earmarking, but not in perpetuity, but just to correct certain situations. But otherwise, if you begin to advocate for earmarking in perpetuity, it distorts the whole public finance ethos of managing funds. And when I talk about correcting a situation, like in Zambia, we have a classical case where the whole allocation towards environmental protection is about 0.6%. And then you've got these others getting quite a bigger share, like agriculture. Just the subsidy itself is about 2.29%, which is 6 times bigger than the whole budget for environmental protection. So there, you actually see that there's an opportunity to correct the situation, because the objectives of that farmer input support program in terms of productivity, alleviation of rural poverty and things like that hasn't been attained. So you see an opportunity now to correct the situation. So in such cases, you can have earmarking up to a certain point. But I think to advocate for earmarking in perpetuity, I think is a very weak case, which I hope you can withdraw. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. May I speak in Spanish to make a harder argument? She's asking me why I stand up. What, to make an even harder argument. All right, everybody has ready? Is ready? Everybody's ready. El problema no es fácil. Para empezar, yo tengo que pagar la deuda de este país, cualquiera. Y tengo que quedar muy bien con la deuda externa, porque si no pagamos nuestra deuda, que representa un 30% de nuestro presupuesto, o 20 o 25, después nadie me va a prestar y los bancos no nos van a dar plata. Pero además, ahí tengo a los sindicatos en la calle que me están pidiendo aumento de salarios. Y necesitamos hacer inversión en aeropuertos y carreteras. Y tenemos que invertir en el factor más importante de nuestro país, que es el ser humano. Tenemos que gastar en su educación. Tenemos que gastar en su salud. Entonces dígame usted, ¿por qué voy a dedicar yo recursos para proteger una rana? Es más, aquí he oído argumentos que ahí ustedes con ese trabajo protegen las fuentes de agua. Pero si el agua es un bien libre, es un recurso que se reproduce libremente, eso entonces yo no lo veo así tan fácil. Y además, si yo tengo que escoger entre proteger un mono o una culebra y combatir la pobreza del país, no tengo la menor duda que voy a invertir en la gente y voy a invertir para mejorar los temas de la pobreza. Pero lo peor del caso es que yo lo he visto porque yo he mandado a mi gente a revisar las cuentas de estos programas. Y resulta que como tienen asignaciones, que además quieren subirlas, se quedan tranquilos y no ejecutan el dinero. Y al final del año siempre tienen excedentes que no han utilizado. Y quieren que la sociedad les siga financiando la ineficiencia con que maneja la plata. Es muy difícil convencerlo. Ahí vinieron también la gente de cultura, la gente que quiere hacer cine y la gente que quiere hacer teatro, a decirnos que eso era más importante que poner vacunas a los niños o pagarle a los maestros o hacer hospitales. Cuesta mucho, la plata es muy escasa. Y para terminar, quieren hacer fondos especiales, que son unos fondos de biodiversidad. Ahí se pasan hablándome de eso. Los de cultura quieren hacer fondos de cultura también. ¿Y cuál es el peligro que tenemos ahí? Que si esa plata la sacamos de los presupuestos nacionales, el control sobre esos dineros lo perdemos. Y no solamente puede haber ineficiencia, sino que hasta podemos detectar problemas de corrupción. De manera que necesito ver argumentos un poquito más claros para poder decidir poner recursos en una actividad como esta, que, repito, prefiero invertir en el ser humano que en los animales. That's what a Minister of Finance would say.
It's clear we have a former Minister of Finance in the team here. Now let's hear how's the situation in Mongolia.
Good evening, everyone. I am Sagwazeya from Minister of Finance. So let me give you a brief explanation on the fiscal policy, sustainable fiscal policy. Sustainable fiscal policy is very important for our economy because in our case, in our country, have facing economic recession over the past 3 years, and we have so lack of okay. I'm a little bit worried. Please understand. So we have a policy on fiscal. Excuse me. As we are developing economy, we are facing with debt challenges. Our debt, public debt is mainly driven by the fiscal unsustainable policy. So we have a large amount of fiscal deficits that profoundly impacted on the government debt. So today we have reached our 80% of its GDP, and also cost of the debt is substantially increasing. So we cannot imagine without sustainable development, without proper fiscal policy. So every year, the line ministries and agencies submit their budget into the Ministry of Finance, and the financing gap between budget revenue and expenditure side is very substantial. So we cannot finance every dream list. So that's why we consult with each line ministries during the discussion of the budget, and we prioritize these activities. So that's the earmarking of revenue is that doesn't mean increasing the revenue, fiscal revenue. It is just allocating the revenues for specific purpose. So, budgeting is simply allocation, simply giving power to spend their expenditures. So why do we need super special power for this activity? So thank you.
Okay, so all of a sudden it doesn't look so good for biodiversity anymore. We have financial crisis, debts, and so many other things. What do you think where should we go from here?
Can we first, hear the responses to the comments and reactions of our negative camp from our affirmative camp?
Thank you very much. I think we can conclude that we are all on the same page, and the ayes have it. Bruno, you're very right that you're going to earmark, and even if you're doing it to correct your budget baselines, but you did agree with us that there's a case for earmarking. So thank you for confirming our view. And I think, and to thank you, Guillermo, for also confirming our view, that just as the people are in the streets crying for higher salaries, they're also crying for safe water, protection from climate change and ecosystem-based adaptation, and insurance against droughts and flooding, which biodiversity provides. So that is correct. And also, our learned friend, thank you for indicating that biodiversity helps us to be able to service our debt, not only our debt to other development imperatives, but also our debt to the future. And by investing in the biodiversity, we will be able to bank on the future.
Also, Guillermo, I noticed there was the demonization of the protection of the frogs and the sloth and maybe the jaguar, for which Costa Rica is very popular in marketing these species to bring in revenue through tourism. So thanks again. We want to recognize that most of our countries are unindustrialized. We are behind in technology, and we have very forest-dependent communities, and that pretty much all of our sectors are very natural resource-based. And so to want to put biodiversity to a side as it relates to budget, in the business sense would be very risky, because biodiversity or nature is actually our natural asset. It's actually, in dollars and cents, it's capital. And so if you are only, for example, in the case of Belize, 1.8 billion in GDP, and you're inverting back into management of your capital, just 1.4, I would say is a very risky business deal. Bankers and business people, they're about profits and they're about protecting their investment. Shouldn't our countries be protecting that investment, which is our natural capital? If not, then I would ask you to go back home as an experienced ex-minister of finance and remove the sloth and remove the frog, stop marketing them, and use whatever else you could find, maybe a dry piece of wood, whatever, to also state that you would want to concentrate on human beings, would be stating that our very existence isn't dependent on our environment and our surroundings. Water will not remain clean if there are not actions or activities to mitigate pollution from agriculture, contamination from the different sectors. Clean air, our children will not be healthy if there is pollution. There needs to be some form of investment into these activities that will ensure that the same child that you're concerned about is healthy. There is nothing worse than a child in school that is hungry because the forest which once fed her no longer exists. Thank you.
Yes. I actually don't understand that why our colleagues is worried about rat. Biodiversity is not about the conserving contagious animal, right? And the other thing is, we do have cat to take care of the rat. Or if you don't have cats, you can import from Thailand, right? So conservation of benefit animal or wildlife is have more value to human being. Like forest conservation, they can produce a lot of food and can resolve the poverty to our human being. That's one thing that why biodiversity is very important. The other thing is the earmarking. The earmarking process, it doesn't mean that Minister of Environment want all of the money from taxation for the conservation of biodiversity. We just want part of that taxation or part of that money, and it is like to give us a certainty in managing project or to implement our policy or plan in accordance with a certain of the money that we have received for this year or the next year or 10 years in the future. So we can have a long-term plan and we can be certain that our indicator or our outcome will be successful as we intended at the beginning. So just part of your money for the conservation of biodiversity. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like maybe there's a lot of benefits that our finance friends have overlooked. Shall we give them one more opportunity to respond?
Yes, of course. They should already make their peace also.
Okay. What was you appear to have gotten into a comfort zone too quickly. I wasn't agreeing with you, but correcting you. In case in your world those two appear similar. Like I indicated, I mean, as a pragmatist, personally, I don't believe in extremes of either extreme earmarking or extreme non-earmarking. Like I'm saying, I mean, development finance, as it were, requires pragmatists that respond to the context, you know, in the given country or region. And this is the more reason, like I indicated, if you mean to correct, you know, a given situation, you can earmark to a certain point, but I think earmarking to the extreme where it goes in perpetuity may not be the most feasible, you know, route to take. So, that was a correction and not concurring with you, thank you.
Yo quiero retomar la idea de las finanzas sostenibles. Creo que aquí no estamos hablando el mismo idioma. La sostenibilidad, creo que allá la ven de una forma y yo la veo con unas finanzas públicas sostenibles. Si no garantizamos equilibrios fiscales, estabilización económica, sostenibilidad fiscal, no va a alcanzar ni para las escuelas, ni para las carreteras, ni para los hospitales, y menos para la naturaleza o la música de los niños en las escuelas. Entonces, lo primero que tenemos que hacer es sanear nuestras cuentas fiscales. Tenemos 80% de la deuda a PIB. You said 80% of 80? 80% de la deuda pesa 80% del PIB. La cantidad de intereses que el país tiene que pagar todos los años es altísima. Ustedes todavía quieren más gasto, ustedes todavía quieren recibir más dinero, que lo que va a significar es más deuda, hasta que va a llegar el día en que no va a haber forma de pagar esa deuda y el mercado internacional y las calificadoras de riesgo y los bancos internacionales nos van a cortar el crédito. Así que yo lo que les pido es que por favor consideren estos elementos y esténse tranquilos con la plata que están recibiendo en este momento.
Okay. In addition to our colleagues, we have now we are paying almost 20% of its budget into the interest payment. That's why fiscal sustainability is very important for the whole economy, not only environment. I understand that biodiversity is very crucial for sustainable development in the economy. So we need to balance. Of course, we have line ministries. We use program-based planning. We have own classification, own fiscal classification guidelines and methods, and we can plan instead of earmarking. We can use program planning, entire program, national biodiversity program, instead of earmarking specific biodiversity revenues. Also, earmarking, we have experience in earmarking revenues from biodiversity. We have a special government special fund that mainly finance from the biodiversity revenues, and that case is not so good for us because they're financing small amount of activities, and the inefficiencies is not such good, and also there is inflexibility in the budget once we approved by these budget lines, because we cannot adjust these activities simply. Only the way for justification is waiting for the amendment to the budget. That's why we don't need earmarking this revenue. We can use program-based planning, I think.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard both sides. Before we make any decision, I would like to open the floor, also sort of getting some affirmative comments or reactions, and a rebuttal also from the audience. So I'm going to open the floor for this. May I? Sinak has some comments, I think. Is somebody from?
Let's hear what India has to say about earmarking. Is it good or not?
It depends. It's a very tricky question. It depends who you are asking this question to. If you ask this question to an economist, economists would use the efficiency argument that it is inefficient to earmark, etc. Then they are also worried about the fiscal discipline. They would argue that, well, you have limited money, and then there are 10 or 20 competing claims. So the person who can convince more to the Ministry of Finance will get in that proportion. But there are 2-3 issues associated with earmarking of funds. Suppose at the national level you set up a fund. Okay. In the case of biodiversity, since we always undervalue biodiversity, that's one of the issues, which is why the money is not going to biodiversity. You may be under-providing for conservation of biodiversity by setting up the fund. There are also issues associated with how do you utilize that fund, and we have a number of examples, Indian fund, Thai fund, etc. Monies were there but were not utilized. This also gives an excuse to politicians. Any problem crops up, they will say, oh, we have set up the fund, so we are fine, our responsibility is over. And then just one more point, that we always argue, and under BIOFIN also we are saying that conservation of biodiversity is not a subject of a given ministry, whether it is environment or any other ministry. We are saying that you mainstream biodiversity. If you set up a fund, that means you are working against mainstreaming the biodiversity. So that would probably go against the conservation in the long term.
Thank you. From India. Yes, I see a hand here at the back. For or against?
Yes, but I'm an economist and I have a different view. What was missing there is actually the time framework, short term, long term, and very long term. In a democracy like my country, Sri Lanka, and probably the short term objectives receive the policy priorities, because politicians have to take politically correct actions looking at the next elections. So actually the environment or the biodiversity is somewhere down the line, and it is a long term thing. And when you come to the long term things, and the whole thing is gone actually. The next point I want to highlight is actually when the government faced the narrower fiscal space, and the government has actually, they have to cut down the expenditure, and very easily, what they cut down very easily are those long-term things and not the short-term thing. So actually our priorities can be wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, very good, yeah. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I think both the sides have argued their point very forcefully. I'm not here to judge who is winner, who is loser. I feel that this is just like looking at a number, and one says it is 6, other one says it is 9. Both are right in their own aspects. Actually, there could be a win-win situation. It's just like, as we know, the allocation biodiversity is so meager, but the impact is very, very profound in any country. We are facing a situation where we are almost desperate. We have heard one of the friends speaking there that we have to pay a lot of debt. In fact, 20% money goes only in paying the debt. Now we have to think why this situation has come. Because somewhere we have not utilized the resources sustainably. And had we properly thought at that point of time, we would not have come to this stage. In fact, by not thinking in this direction, at least now, we may go into a bigger and bigger problem. I just want to relate it with one example. We had seen one film where a person is running with a bicycle. He has no time to climb on the bicycle, because if we climb on the bicycle, it will be late. And in the process, he's running with the bicycle. That is what we are doing with the biodiversity allocation. We said if we spend money for biodiversity, we'll be losing out on some other term. Like they said, we have got turf war. All the people think that our sector is more important. They're all working at cross purposes. Very small amount you have to pay, but impact will be very, very huge. And I want to say, not only earmarking by government departments, I want to go one stage further, that earmarking of all the projects which the government takes anywhere in the jurisdiction of this nation. They should a portion of it for biodiversity conservation and environment conservation, which will be a small amount, but it will go a long way. So as somebody has said rightly from Sri Lanka, that in the short term thinking, you are right, because in short term, you satisfy the politicians, and politicians anyway has got short term to live in the government. We conservationists has to be in the government for long terms, and in society for long terms. So for short term perspective, negative people are right. But for long term perspective, I think the positive people are quite right. So I think both are right in their own perspective. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can take one or two more contributions, if any. Let's see if there's anyone who would like to contribute. Yes, over there, please. Please introduce yourself and tell us where you're from.
I'm Ishwar. I'm from National Biodiversity Authority of India. If we look at investment on biodiversity, if someone asks why I should invest on flagship species like tiger, if I invest on tiger's conservation, the entire home range of tiger has to be conserved. By then, the entire catchment of that area, then the catchment would give a lot of water which is available in that watershed, which will be the lifeline of many people down the line around that flagship species. I would feel that it is worthwhile to invest on biodiversity in the name of these flagship species, whether it is earmarking the budget to invest on these species or through revenues from the government. The only issue here is once the fund gets into the consolidated funds of the governments, earmarking is a big challenge in every nation. This is what is my observation over the period of time. Thank you.
So that's interesting. We should invest in flagship species rather than the rat or snake. So I think we heard many interesting arguments back and forth. And I think let's hear from our colleague from the European Commission.
Yes, thank you. Theo Seinen from the European Commission. I think I hear a bit the arguments both sides. I would like to think about ministries of finance as friends and allies. That of course means that they should also talk a little bit our language, but they should help us. And I think there's a lot to gain for ministers from earmarking. In the end, when you have a good story to tell to the citizens what the money is used for, that helps to underpin the public service. There, the environment, the biodiversity side can be an ally. Of course, there's the efficiency case. And I actually have an economics background, so I fully understand. I've been in state aid control to ensure efficient use of resources, so I fully understand the need for a modern and an efficient public financing. So I know the case against it. But let me reassure ministries of finance, if there are earmarked taxes, sure, it will not be enough, so they will come back for also a part from the central budget.
Thank you for that. And maybe, would that be the final punch in favor of earmarking or not? I think we had so many good arguments, and I think now comes the most exciting part of this session, because we're going to select a winner. So Marcia, over to you to tell us how we're going to do that.
Yes, I think what we're going to do is to ask our audience to help us decide. Those by standing up, okay? Show of hands I will not probably be able to see, those show of hands. So I think standing up will make it clearer for us who of the camps will be, will have won this debate. So on the affirmative side, can I have people stand up? Affirmative side.
Let's see if they're the winners.
Winners.
We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and a half.
Earmarking, I'm sorry.
Throw earmarking
Those
cards.
for earmarking.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22.
Oh.
James, are you for or against?
It's time for true colors, James.
21. Is that 21? 21, okay.
Right.
21 for earmarking. For
the debate.
there's still arguments here. Okay, against earmarking.
Are they the winners? Let's see. It's coming very close.
Please stand up. Okay. 1.
All right, some more people are
you
rising.
standing up, sir? The one on my left? Are you standing? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's just half of it. Okay. Very good. Okay. Well, this ends our very exciting activity for this afternoon. I think there are so many, take-home messages that each of us could probably, go back with and, study more, review more, on how we could really be able to sustain financing for sustainable development. There are so many avenues, there are so many measures. I think what we need is really to make a business case on why we really need, to put money into biodiversity. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My last word from my colleague here.
Thank you. My last message is I would like to call for a big applause for, sorry, the losing camp, but they were really good. And slightly bigger applause for the winning camp. And I would like to ask for another big applause for our debate master.
And for the moderator. And for all of us who attended this session. Thank you very much. Thank you, debaters. Thank you. Thank you.
Let me tell you the arguments that came back. Very good, Anna.